Hello. We are coming to you today I'm in Cincinnati. And Michael, where are you from right now?
I am currently in Washington, D.C. at
Washington,
Reason
D.C.
Magazine headquarters.
Reason Magazine headquarters. I am, of course, am Robert Farley. I am an assistant professor at the Patterson School of Diplomacy and International Commerce at the University of Kentucky. And with me, as I sort of suggested, is Michael Moynihan, who is the senior editor at Reason Magazine. How is the weather today in Washington?
It's insufferable as always. It was like 300 degrees, and it's in the middle of October. And I am sort of vaguely suicidal at this point. So.
Right, it was 90 yesterday in Cincinnati and Lexington, which is quite surprising for this kind of year. And last week I think it was 40 in the nights, and so it's a bit of an Indian summer here in the Kentucky-Ohio theater, which is very strange. But anyway, so we are here today, I believe less than a month away from the election, and we're both interested in foreign policy, and so we're going to talk a little bit, at least start with, talking about foreign policy in the election. So, I don't know, Michael, why don't you start off and give some initial thoughts on how foreign policy is going to matter for the election in November?
Yeah, sure. It's funny thinking about this morning. Because we had talked to, hey, we'll talk about foreign policy and election. Mm-hmm. I was kind of poking around and realizing, I don't know if you found the same thing, that foreign policy has pretty much vanished from the election. I mean, had this been 4 years ago, foreign policy was dominating, local city council races, for Christ's sake.
Right.
This is amazing how little foreign policies. Look, it's understandable too. There's enormous amounts of government spending that people are worried about. There's deficits that people are worried about. There's unemployment that people are worried about. It's
right.
been sticking at 10%, and obviously that's left, right, and center. That's worrying people. Afghanistan obviously is the big foreign policy issue of the moment, but yet it has been the worst year in Afghanistan since this kind of interminable war started. We're in the ninth year now, and it's been the biggest number of casualties this year.
Right.
Or I should say specifically deaths. I don't want to confuse casualties and soldiers killed. It's something like 500 odd people or something this year. But yet, it doesn't seem to be making much of an impact because I don't think people feel that foreign policy is. Those years after 9/11, when there was both a mixture of, kind of paranoia about what was going to happen, giving an enormous amount of power to the executive, allowing, these things like the TSA to be built, and Homeland Security, this sort of awful, monstrous government programs. That seems to have completely disappeared. People hear in the background things about Middle East peace, and they just don't even care about it. They just know that it's never going to happen. I think this is in the head of the average voter. Afghanistan, again, it's been a hard slog. They know there's something kind of dodgy with the government in Kabul, with Karzai. I think there's something dodgy about the regime in Pakistan. But specifically, you would think that somebody like Rand Paul, who is running in your state, who is royalty of the kind of old right isolationist. His father's Ron Paul. He actually has kind of moderated his position in Afghanistan and said, well, he doesn't want to sound like an isolationist, but it hasn't been an issue, which is really, really kind of stunning to me, considering it has been the worst year in Afghanistan since the beginning of that war.
Right. I think that the biggest reason it's not. I agree that it is that foreign policy has had only really a minimum impact. I think that. You are beginning to see, and this is fascinating, and I'll get back to Afghanistan in a second, but the Democrats are trying to bring it up in a couple ways right now. And the ways they're trying to bring it up is that we are seeing more ads about China decrying sort of Chinese currency manipulation or whatever else that the Chinese are doing to us, which is unfortunate and bad. And so you are seeing that finding its way into the Democratic Party campaign narrative. And you're also finding this bit about foreign money influencing American elections, which is very sort of nebulous, and when you actually do the numbers, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which I think is this malevolent organization for whatever reason, but the actual amount of money it takes in is almost all American money. There's a little bit of foreign money there, but it's not
and Obama walked that back, I think, yesterday about the foreign money in the chamber.
Right, but I think you're going to find it from. I think Obama did walk it back, but you're going to find it on blogs and so forth like that. And so people, when we are thinking about anything about the outside world, it does seem to be the Democrats who are using those campaign tropes, and they're using it in sort of this insidious way. Let's be afraid of the foreigner who's here to take our jobs and here to control our politics and so forth, which, from my point of view, as sort of a cosmopolitan lefty, I kind of find pretty troubling. On the one hand, I can sort of see the upside of the campaign tactics. On the other side, it's really pretty bothersome. If you're the sort of person who's really worried about corporate money in American politics, then you should be worried about American corporate money in American politics, because the foreign corporate money is really kind of small change, right? Small potatoes compared to what's going on here. Yeah. But yeah, Afghanistan just isn't there at all, and Iraq just isn't there at all. I think the reason for that is that the only people who would consider not voting for someone because of their position in Afghanistan are by and large on the left.
And so mostly, yeah.
Right. And so in 2006 and 2008, you could mobilize those voters with sort of anti-war arguments. Now, nobody's really trying to mobilize those voters because the Democratic Party can't really paint itself as being anti-war, since its standard bearer expanded the war. But it's also interesting that even all the reasons we give for the enthusiasm gap, the reasons that we give for why Democrats aren't going to turn out, people don't normally talk about Afghanistan as one of the really big ones. I mean, it's sort of in there as part of the conversation about why Democrats might not turn out. But it's not the top of the list. There's a bunch of other stuff, the public option, civil liberties, which is related to foreign policy. But the expansion of the war in Afghanistan isn't even the biggest explanation for why there's an enthusiasm gap between Democrats and Republicans.
I think you raise a good point about, I am, being that I work at a libertarian magazine, I don't think it would surprise you to know that I am a pretty rabid free trader. It was interesting to me, and I've written quite a bit about tea parties and such. This seems to be the foreign policy issue, and it is something that the sort of populist right of the Tea Party movement and the left kind of have in common. And I wrote something about this not too long ago, just a brief blog post. The idea that Tea Party types are big kind of free market people. I mean, they say this, but the foreign policy issue that concerns them most is taking American jobs. That's what I don't buy this at all, but they're shipping jobs to China, and then, as you're saying, currency manipulation. All of this is kind of this economic xenophobia. That somehow my lot in life is really diminished by free trade, by less protectionism. And then if you ask them about Afghanistan, it's like, look. Is Afghanistan like Vietnam? This is something that always comes up, and especially when you talk to people who have kind of a minor interest in politics and sort of follow it. And I say to them, look, there are a few things about Afghanistan that is like Vietnam. It seems to be an unending war, number one. Number two, there is the kind of Cambodia parallel where, Cambodia in this situation is Pakistan. But the one thing that makes it incredibly different is that in this operation that has lasted almost 9 years, almost 10 years, Americans have suffered an enormous, I think, a horrifying number of casualties in the last year, but it has been 1,300 people in almost 10 years. And look, I would say this, purely from trying to figure out why people don't care about this. I think this is tragic on every level. But this is, less than were killed in Peleliu in a day in the Second World War. And, we had 58,000 people killed in less time in Vietnam. So I think people can put it out of their minds successfully and say, hey, I really care primarily about getting back to work and saving jobs from going overseas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, it doesn't surprise me that people aren't paying attention.
Right, and on Afghanistan, I think that there is still, even to the extent that people are now suggesting, and polls indicate, well, was the war in Afghanistan a good idea or a bad idea? Even a fair amount of people who think that maybe it was a bad idea don't necessarily think it was an unjust war, and that's a big difference with how I think people interpreted Iraq, where there was this distinction between not only thinking that Iraq, was a good idea or a bad idea, but that Iraq was potentially an unjust war, and the idea that Afghanistan was an unjust war. Is, I think, much more of a minority opinion. I think, there are more people who think it was a bad idea, whether it's just or not. But that sort of dampens the fervor of anti-war activists regarding, and not just anti-war activists, but anti-war attitudes regarding Afghanistan. It certainly is interesting, and I have to. I think a lot of people have already read this book, and so it doesn't need the plug. But I just recently finished a book called Matterhorn, and unfortunately the name of the author escapes me temporarily. But it's about the experiences of a marine company in Vietnam, and it's really just it's remarkable, the casualties that this and the experiences that it's like the DOS boat of the Marines in Vietnam. And the experiences and the casualties that this Marine infantry company accepts during this period, and the just profound distinction between how people interpreted casualties in that war, where the company loses 30 guys in a day, and how we have interpreted casualties in Afghanistan and Iraq. Just the transformation, the magnitude of understanding.
It's another question that I think. If the economy was kind of chugging along, that people would perhaps ask, and it's an important question, and I think this is another one of those Vietnam parallels, is what is the end game at this point? I think there's so much, inside the Beltway, there is so many people so deep in the weeds on policy that they forget to explain the kind of very basics to Americans. And, it does remind you of sort of 1972 to 1975 and Vietnam, of this sort of peace with honor. So are we losing men and women too, I suppose, to be very PC about it, every day or every week for kind of an unstated cloudy goal? And that cloudy goal is, we'll keep this kind of corrupt Karzai government in power, and we'll try to sort of satiate the weirdos in Pakistan and seal up that border. But the Taliban, who recently claimed to control 75% of the country, I think that's obviously overstated. But 10 years and what, or 9 years and what? And so, what is the end game? And I know that Obama was trying to say, look, we're going to have troop surge, 100,000 troops into Afghanistan, and I am, because his campaign slogan was not that, hey, I'm not anti-war, I'm anti-stupid wars. Iraq was a stupid war, Afghanistan was the right war, we took our eye off the ball. And I think the Woodward book has kind of shown, in total honesty and fairness, I haven't read it, I've just read excerpts of it, the ones that have been in the newspaper.
Has anybody read it? Does anybody ever read the Woodward book?
No,
do they just read the excerpt?
He was like, I don't know why he bothers writing them, he should just write the excerpts himself.
Right.
But this shows that it kind of shows that there's not a lot of stomach for this. He doesn't want to be fighting this war, and hell, you can't blame him. And I think that rather than he's done campaigning. Look, I'm not the Chicago lefty that hangs out with Bernadine Dorn. I do want to put troops in the right theater of war. But now it's like, okay, you got them there. Let's get a little explanation to what the end game is here.
Right, and I think that one of the things that came out of the book too was certainly was something that I think that libertarians and people on the left can agree with, is this idea. Although I don't know your perspective exactly, but the idea that came out that he understands 10 years and $1 trillion in Afghanistan as a defeat. Right, that no matter what the actual end game in Afghanistan is, the contribution of that. Of resources of that magnitude represent a strategic defeat of the United States, which is a perspective that often seems absent from sort of how we think about foreign policy and how we think about war. Is this real cost-benefit evaluation? when we. Just to bring up something that has nothing to do with campaigns, I just read this report on. You familiar with piracy in Somalia? Do you know anything about the issue, or do you just sort of there are pirates in Somalia?
Yeah. I mean, I've followed a little bit, and there was a great libertarian book about this by a guy named Pete Leeson. I don't know if you read Pete Leeson's book. He published it about the economies of pirates. I suspect that some viewers might want to check it out. But
Right.
Pete Leeson. It's called The Invisible Hook. Good book.
The Invisible Hook.
Yes.
So one of the things that this GAO report pointed out was that not only has the government failed to make any effort to study the economic costs of piracy, so in other words, what the economic cost would be if we just did nothing. Mm-hmm. We have also made no effort to tabulate the cost of all the anti-piracy efforts we're conducting. So you start thinking about foreign policy endeavors in terms of cost-benefit analysis, and it turns out we have no idea what the costs are, and we have no idea what the benefits are, because no one has ever bothered to sit down and try to calculate either the costs or the benefits, which is obviously troubling.
It's very troubling. Yeah, and the other thing I will say about pirates, a personal anecdote, is that I'll give full credit to my brother-in-law, who is a member of the Swedish Navy, who is now down there fighting pirates, or so he tells me, or he's watching pirate movies, or I don't know what he's doing, but apparently he's battling pirates, and he was in Afghanistan too. Swedes. Can you imagine what the Swedes are in Afghanistan and they're fighting pirates? Things you didn't know.
They used to be Vikings, and they were kind of went all over.
Oh yeah, they just get on ships and try to fight people. It's very common.
Right. Okay. So let's. I mean, do we have anything else to say about foreign policy in the election? I mean, basically, we've said that foreign policy doesn't seem to matter at all in the election. I mean, is there any other conclusion we want to make about that? Or
no. I think that's generally right. I mean, it is an amazing thing of how the tides kind of turn quickly in American politics. That if you had told somebody in 2006 that in a midterm election, and foreign policy was enormous in the shellacking that the Republicans took in 2006. If you were to tell them 4 years from now, nobody was going to give a shit. I mean, to be honest,
right.
I think people would be pretty surprised. So I think that's generally right.
Right. I guess I took this. I sat in on an American survey of American history course, and the professor made the argument that foreign policy has only really mattered in a very small subset of U.S. elections, and one of them was the 1800 election, and the others were the early elections in the Cold War, in 48 and 52, and to an extent in 60, and in 2004 through 2008. That it's really rare for foreign policy to matter, and so in that sense, we might even say that we're returning to normalcy, where people in America don't care about foreign policy and don't vote about foreign policy. So. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
anyway,
okay. No, I was going to say that there's, you could quibble with that, and I think that I would say that the second half of the 20th century has been very sort of foreign policy focused in elections. I mean, the 1980 election had a lot of, I think what people on the left would call red baiting, and I think that what the Reaganites would say, sort of sensible ideas, especially after the disaster in Iran with the hostages, and Reagan saying we need to beef up against the Soviets, which strangely enough is something that he said, something he sort of did, and then in his second term was incredibly soft. And all the neoconservatives and people. Commentary magazine, I would say, is an interesting thing, and I wrote about this in Reason in the print issue 3 years ago, I think, reviewing Jacob Heilbrun's book. It's interesting to see neoconservatives, specifically those around Commentary Magazine, who seem to have this kind of amnesia about how they treated Reagan from
how bitter the invective was in '86 and so forth. Yeah,
really, really amazing. He's a softie. He's gone soft in Central America. He's gone soft on the Soviet Union and the Cold War. I mean, really, really stunning stuff. But that's an entirely separate show.
Right. Yeah, I think an argument can be made for 1968 as well. But anyway, so moving forward, James Jones is leaving. Now, do you see this as sort of meaningful and consequential in terms of U.S. Afghanistan or other U.S. security policy?
No, not really. And I think the reason is, I mean, this has been a long time coming, hasn't it? I mean, I've paid attention to Jones like kind of sort of peripherally, and every time he comes up, or he came up, it was in the context of that Jones is not long for this world as a national security advisor. So the Woodward book comes out again, this Woodward book that kind of pushes him to be replaced by Tom Donilon. And the interesting thing about Donilon is that nobody on the right is saying that Donilon is incompetent or less competent. Or the first thing that I heard from people on the right was that he played a key role in borking Bob Bork. And so he was very influential in convincing the Senate to kill Bob Bork, and it's like that was the first thing that came up. It was really, really bizarre. So I think that this obviously means quite a bit to the administration. Obviously means quite a bit to the sort of real the sort of dynamic inside the White House. But I mean, is it going to change much? I mean, Secretary Gates said that he said something that he thought Donilon was going to be a disaster or something. I mean, do you remember this? This was right. Well, this is ages ago, but I mean, I guess that there's something it tells you about the politics of the Obama administration. I'm not entirely sure what it is. I mean, somebody that was said to be a disaster by the defense secretary, who's taking over from a guy that had a very, very poor relationship with Barack Obama and was apparently bad-mouthing him on the cocktail circuit. I mean, I suppose there's some sort of message in there, but I'm not entirely sure what it is. I don't want to extrapolate and say, goodness gracious, that there's so much infighting, because it doesn't seem that this is that common, but
right.
What's your take on this?
Well, I mean, my take is pretty similar to yours in that all we ever really heard about Jones was how little influence he had, and this was a consistent refrain about Jones' role in the administration. And so, in that sense, it's not either shocking that it's leaving, and it doesn't necessarily indicate that there's going to be any sort of big change in policy coming up. I'm also I'm just returning to this idea of the elections and foreign policy. If you say the word James Jones to the American public, what percentage of Americans are really going to identify who this guy is? And you say Tom Donilon. It's going to be single digits, right? Single digits are going to. I mean, most people are going to say, "Oh, isn't he the guy that gave the Kool-Aid?"
Yeah, People's Temple. Yeah.
Right.
It was a good time. People's Temple.
Right, yeah. And so it's sort of fascinating how little impact this has on things like elections and so forth. But no, I don't see. I mean, I did read, and it seems plausible that apparently Donilon and Gates came to some sort of modus vivendi at some point. And so, I mean, that's what I guess people have. That's the response to Donilon moving up is that Woodward was effectively outdated by the time he reported that about Gates and Donilon, and that really they've managed to patch things up and come to a peace agreement and so forth, which certainly makes sense. But then again, Gates is on his way out soon. Mullen is on his way out, and so we are sort of very briefly, or in a very short period, looking at an entirely different national security crew that's going to be running things. And that is interesting in that it does sort of provide an opportunity for a rethink of Afghanistan. It is going to be kind of interesting as pushing forward that we're going to be pushing forward with an almost entirely separate national security team, although with some important cogs still in place, like David Petraeus, who obviously has a key interest in the Afghanistan operation, has a key interest in maintaining a certain set of policies in Afghanistan. But you may have a different set of attitudes coming from this much different national security team that we have pushing forward.
I thought it was interesting this morning. Make with it what you will, because it was given to a journalist like Rowan Scarborough at the Washington Times, and the only one to read it, the Washington Times, incidentally, as Blogging Heads viewers know, is the great Eli Lake, who was a friend and a mensch. But there was an interesting cover story today of this pushback from General Keane And I think Stephen Biddle was quoted too from CFR about how the troop surge in Afghanistan is working. I don't know if you saw this, but they're saying, look, it's exactly kind of, if you put these kind of overlays, this at time, this XY axis is exactly the same as the Iraq surge. It took a little time. It's a similar timetable, but there's this sort of pushback now that the surge in Afghanistan is working. So I wonder, the question is, and the reason I bring this up is, when there is this changing of the guard and the sort of national security apparatus, is this kind of softening it for the next crew that, hey, this is working, don't change anything? I'd be interesting to see what, because the military is, the other day, it's also it was in the LA Times, that there's people in the military that are advocating these cross-border attacks in Afghanistan, and it's, the whole thing seems to be a complete and utter mess. You have this pushback that says things are going well, and these people off the record telling reporters that we really need to step up operations in Pakistan. So from the perspective of somebody kind of watching the politics of this within the Beltway, I'm fascinated to see what will be on there, how these things change so quickly. In 8 months from now, what the strategy is, will they be trying to extract themselves from this or not? So.
Right. Well, it's fascinating, and I have been, I should start off by saying that I think that the surge in Iraq was a tactical and operational success and a strategic failure, in the sense that, for a variety of reasons. But the thing about is that I think a lot of people, in analyzing the tactical and operational effectiveness of the surge early on, made real fools of themselves. And I say that because I made a fool of myself when I was talking about the surge in 2007.
I would just say, incidentally, Iraq existed to make fools of all of us.
Right.
If you go back, the idiotic things that I wrote and said about Iraq, they could, fill a few volumes. So.
Right. Well, and I said very mean things about people who were saying that the surge, the surge was working in a tactical sense, and because it looked like in the first few months, it looked like a disaster. It looked like a tactical disaster. More people were dying, and there was no indication that violence was going down, and so forth. And then suddenly, violence just fell to nothing, right, or virtually nothing in Iraq.
Virtually nothing, yeah.
And so, for my own part, I have been very reluctant to make any assessments of how the Afghan surge is going on an operational level, right? Whether the Marja offensive is working or Kandahar or these other things, because it's just so hard to tell. And so, in that sense, it's not implausible for people like Biddle to make the argument, to make the claim that, well, it's working, we just don't have the appropriate public metrics for thinking about how it's working. What I will say is that there's still a way to play even success that leads the United States to get out of Afghanistan in sort of a reasonable time frame. And I think that was kind of the whole point of where the Obama presidency was going in terms of the Afghan surge, was that this was something supposed to be kind of like the Iraqi surge, that we go big and then we go home. It has a transformational effect on the ground, and that means we can go home. And I think that's still their hope. Whether that has anything to do with conditions on the ground and whether it's at all relatable in a political sense remains to be seen. I don't know. It's very complicated, I guess is the short answer. Very complicated.
Unfortunately, it is, yeah.
Right. So let's move from this discussion of serious policy to literature. So we have a Nobel Prize winner in literature, Maria Vargas Llosa, who has won the Nobel Prize. Now, as I suggested earlier, the only book of his I've ever read is Feast of the Goat, which is a fantastic novel about the Trujillo dictatorship. Right, in the Dominican Republic. Do you give us your thoughts on this award?
Well, I wrote my column last week on this, and everyone watching should go read it right now, immediately. Go read it, print it out.
Pause. Pause.
Yeah, pause. You had it on the street corner like a completely insane person. It was actually a kind of an angry column for me because I lived for five years in Sweden. My wife is Swedish. I saw this process in a kind of Swedish cultural perspective. So I wrote a column about the politics of this. I mean, I do write about politics. I would like to write about literature, but nobody at Reason gives a shit about my opinions of literature, and I think that's completely justified. So I wrote about the politics of this, and I said, I got a few emails which were fairly interesting, and one of them, completely ignoring what I wrote, said, "Hey, you've talked about Mario Vargas Llosa's politics, which is very important to his career." But you didn't talk about it, the literary merits of Feast of the Goat, The War at the End of the World, or any of his really fantastic storytellers, fantastic books. And the reason I didn't do that, and I tried to outline this in the column, is that I was trying to make the point that the Nobel Prize for Literature is a very, very political prize. It always has been. And people on the right, and I would say that Vargas Llosa is pretty much where I am.
Is it Llosa? I mean,
I
said his name before verbally, so it's Llosa.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like one of those NPR people that says Nicaragua. But his politics are pretty much where mine are. He's a classical liberal. He has said, and I point this out also in the column, that he said, much like Hayek wrote in National Review, I think it was in the 60s or 70s, wrote a piece called "Why I'm Not a Conservative." Vargas Llosa has been very, very sort of strident about pointing out that he's not a conservative. He is a classical liberal. He is for drug legalization. He's an open borders kind of guy, as I am. But he's a free market guy. And, he is very political, not just because his novels are political, but because in 1990 he ran for president of his country of Peru and was expected to win and unfortunately lost to the thuggish turned out to be a thuggish dictator, Alberto Fujimori. Known locally there as El Chino, despite the fact that he was Japanese, he was called basically the China. So a lot of nuance there. The prize is political. The prize has always been political. Before it, Dario Fo, Jose Saramago, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, once a friend of Vargas Llosa, who famously punched him in the face in 1978 or 77. It was an interesting thing because the immediate reaction in Europe, and specifically in Sweden, was waves of invective of saying that this guy is a horrible monster, and the key word here in European context is the word neoliberal, which is the worst thing you can call somebody, neoliberal, which is a classical liberal, somebody who believes in free markets. And the reaction to this, especially in Europe, especially in Sweden, was one of total shock. So I wrote a column about this, saying that the reactions to this have all been political. The selection in some way was political. I think that in a way, there's a payback for Borges, one of the great Latin American writers, Argentinian writer, who never got the prize, and he didn't get it. Specifically, this is in a really good biography of Borges. Specifically, one of the people on the Nobel Committee said he didn't get the prize because he visited Pinochet. I didn't know what year. And this is true. And if you read Christopher Hitchens' new very good memoir, Hitch 22, with the unfortunate name Hitch 22, he has a good thing about visiting Borges when he's blind and in Buenos Aires. And he says to Christopher, you really should check out this Pinochet guy. He's the tops. He's pretty great. And the Nobel Committee said, no fucking way. And the other thing which is amazing is that you think of Harold Pinter, who I think is incredibly overrated, but had the correct politics. Not only was Pinter's prize political in a lot of ways, and we know this for various sources, is that his Nobel speech was a really, really bizarre political rant that spent like 10 minutes on the Sandinistas. I mean, it's like, buddy, it's 20 years later.
Right.
Despite the fact that Sandinistas
We've sort of been there, done that. In that sense.
Yeah. I mean, the Sandinistas are back in power, but that's really not what he was talking about. So I wrote about this, the politics of the Nobel, and specifically the Nobel Prize in Literature, which has essentially become that and the Peace Prize combined become the Nobel Prize in politics, basically.
Right.
They made a very good choice. Also, I think, in the Peace Prize this year, of choosing this Chinese dissident, which is really angered the Chinese. Yeah.
Oh yes. Yeah, so. Effectively angered the Chinese. That's actually a subject for another Blogging Heads. Is sort of the growing, well, not just China, but the growing pugnacity of the U.S. the Sino-American relationship, which has been abetted by the Obama administration in a number of areas, which is kind of fascinating. Yeah, the Nobel Prize in I guess, and it's such a different environment because it seemed to me with Saramago, he's one of my favorite novelists, and All the Names is one of my favorite books, and
yes, I mean, by the way, I'll say like Garcia Marquez. Two people whose politics I find absolutely loathsome. Marquez specifically, who has been, his relationship with Castro, I think, is just absolutely vile. But yes, and I should say this as a separation, like the music I listen to, the same thing is true of the novels that I read. They're mostly written by complete and utter communists. and I don't care. So right. Sorry, I just needed to point that out.
No, and that's fine. And as I started reading Saramago before I even had any understanding of his politics. I think I looked later on his Wikipedia page. Oh, well, he's a rabid Marxist. I don't know. It seemed like people were almost willing to sort of apologize for that Marxism rather than celebrate it. And I don't know if we can sort of intelligibly say then that Saramago won it because of his fantastic books. Obviously, you have to write fantastic books to even
that's a requirement. Yeah, it's a requirement. Right. That's for sure.
But I guess in the politics...
But actually, I will say with the one exception of Elfriede Jelinek, the Austrian Stalinist, who won a few years back, who I tried. I can't actually say that I've read much of her stuff, but I tried it. It was just, I thought it was dreadful. But yeah.
Well, now, since you mentioned Austria, let's also talk about something that kind of interests both of us, which is this notional rise of the far right in European politics. So we've been talking about foreign policy and elections.
Sure.
Let's talk about foreign policy, sort of, in other elections, non-American elections. The rise of the far right, the notional rise of the far right in Europe.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've written a few things about this too, and the one country that I pay quite a bit of attention to is Sweden, where I worked at a Swedish think tank and wrote in Swedish media for many years. It's a country that I love dearly and return to quite a bit. So this year it was quite a surprise when they had an election that the Sweden Democrats, a far-right party, and that probably should take issue with the term far-right, because it is interesting to point out that most of these parties are welfare state parties. They're basically social democratic parties that hate immigrants. They say welfare for all except for the brown people, and that's essentially what they're saying. So this has come up. So the Sweden Democrats held the sort of balance of power in Sweden. Nobody will work with them, and they basically, I would like to say they came out of nowhere, but they didn't really. They got about 6% of the vote, and the reason they got 6% of the vote is because no mainstream party would talk about immigration. They're terrified of the conversation.
Nobody tried to co-opt them in any sense, and so they were.
No. And this has, of course, happened in France, where Sarkozy has done a very good job of co-opting Front National, National Front, Le Pen's party, because Le Pen forced the socialists and the conservatives into a runoff election a few years back. So Le Pen is talking about expelling gypsies. He's been very hard on the Muslim minority in Clichy and the banlieues around the city. And now we have last week the Freedom Party in Austria, Jörg Haider's old party. Jörg Haider, of course, died in a car accident last year. And was outed, by the way, as gay from that car crash because he was leaving a gay bar. They won 27% of the vote in Vienna. I mean, in the city of Vienna. I mean, this is not in the Tyrolean hinterlands. 27% in Vienna, and so there is because considering we're talking about foreign policy, there's a foreign policy element to all of this. And what it is there is an isolationism that is very common in these parties. NPD, it was actually an extremist, almost Nazi party in Germany. The Sweden Democrats all want troops out of Afghanistan. They want the Danish far right, the Danish People's Party is the same way. So basically, it's an interesting thing because it's like it's the marrying of the kind of Pat Buchanan types, the European Pat Buchanan types, and I guess it's not a marrying because Pat Buchanan, those types are nativist types anyway. So it is a kind of a Buchananist movement, and what they say is that Muslims have no place in our society. Have shown themselves, and I'll make a quick point that they're not people that can be civilized in a lot of ways. I mean, if you listen to the real extreme rhetoric from these people, of course they kind of dress a lot of it up, but there's no point in being in Afghanistan or Iraq because you can't sort of civilize these types. And I think that there is it's not explicitly said, but I think that's what is implied.
Right. No, I mean, and I think that. In the Dutch context, which a lot of people are more familiar with just because of all the events.
Wilders is on trial now.
Right. That not only are these far right parties welfare state parties, but in a lot of contexts they are actually sort of justifying the anti-rhetoric in terms of liberal values, in terms of things that left-wingers hold dear, right? And if we continue to allow these people to immigrate to our country, then these left-wing values that we hold dear, which is not simply the welfare state, but also a tolerant government, appreciation of women's rights, and appreciation of gay rights, and so forth, that this stuff goes away. And so it's interesting that we do term them as far-right parties, although I think they're also in the Austrian context, you can also sort of describe these parties as a legitimately right-wing in some senses.
Sure. I think that's true.
But you also do have this co-optation of very left-wing arguments about what the state ought to look like and what society ought to look like, in the service of what we are interpreting in an immigration sense to be far right-wing.
Well, look,
that's
I mean,
really fascinating.
in the Swedish context, and this is the same thing has always been true in the British context too, that the BNP, which is a sort of kind of mainstreaming of the National Front and the Nazi parties. Nick Griffin, the head of that party, is a Nazi, is a neo-Nazi, has spoken on the same dais with David Duke. But they've peeled voters off from Labour. They have, it's working class. Kind of traditional working class voters. Same thing is true in the case of Sweden Democrats, which incidentally says not the Swedish Democrats, the Sweden Democrats. It makes no sense. But Wilders is the only one who claims to be a sort of classical liberal, which I find kind of interesting. He says, he's very pro-Israel. That is not the case of NPD in Germany. Freiheitspartei, the Freedom Party in Austria.
Le Pen is pro-Israel, isn't he?
No, he's Israelis, of course, hate him too because he famously said the Holocaust was a detail of the history of the Second World War. Haider went and visited with Saddam Hussein. Before he died, he went and visited with Muammar Gaddafi before he died. So they have a classical kind of old right European kind of proto-Nazi or sort of post-Nazi, not proto-Nazi, kind of situation. Whereas the new parties, like for instance, the Sweden Democrats in Sweden have a couple of guys that are famous bloggers for them and are in their parliamentary group who are Jews, two of them. They have their roots in a Nazi party. Sweden Democrats are born out of a couple of sort of movements. And incidentally, the best book about this in Swedish, which there's no need for it to be translated, but if anyone speaks a Scandinavian language, the best book about this was written by Stieg Larsson. the guy who wrote Girl with the Dragon
Oh,
who wrote a book, last book he wrote before he started writing these wildly successful novels was about the Sweden Democrats. And they have their roots in Sweden. They call it the Brown-Blue Coalition. It's a kind of, they insult the mainstream conservatives who are the blues by calling them brown-blue. But they have their roots in this, and now they have Jews that work for them because they have united behind a common enemy, and that enemy is Muslim immigration. So, it's a really interesting thing. But I would also say that all this hand-wringing that you see in the press about what is happening here, what is happening in Europe, well, I hate to say this, but you sort of deserve it in a way, because people were bringing up, just moderate types that were saying, like I know a few people that are gay rights activists that were saying, look, the Dutch did this, I think in 2004, 2005. They said, if you want to come to Holland, you have to watch this video. And in this video shows two men kissing, and these are Dutch values, get used to it. That I think is a very compelling argument. I think the cultural argument saying that we will not sort of sacrifice what we have sort of advances that we've made in gay rights and rights of women, et cetera, et cetera. That's fine. So what you're saying is absolutely right too, is that they're kind of co-opting this liberal language. And the reason they're doing it, and I think this is the important point to underline, is because the liberals have failed. This is, I reviewed for commentary actually, Paul Berman's new book on Tariq Ramadan, which is hit or miss, but there is a point. Berman, liberal, worked for Mother Jones in the 80s, famously was fired from Mother Jones by Michael Moore. But Berman makes the point, says like, look, this is the stuff that liberals have to fight for. And we're in this situation now where, there's the minority, they're the other in society. So we want to back up the other in society. But at the same time, we have to defend our values. And I think that has been left completely open to be snatched up by these extremist whack job parties by mainstream candidates in Europe. And America, I'll say, has done a better job at integrating its Muslim population. People say there's a backlash now. I'm not entirely sure why. But that said, we can have these really sort of stark, awful, grim conversations in campaigns. But I think that we're all the better for it. And we don't have this thing that the Europeans have, which is a point where they have to try to take that argument back from these really radical groups.
I guess I'm also, from political science point of view, kind of curious about how just electoral structure helps even arrange messaging in these kinds of arguments, right? Because in many of these parliamentary democracies, there is a space to create parties that are making this kind of very tailored argument, right? This argument that brings together this sort of diverse coalition of people who are against diversity, right? Whereas in the United States context, you can't have anything quite like that, simply because of the structure of our electoral politics, which prefers a two-party system and so forth. And that generates not only different coalitions, but a different style of messaging about immigration, about sort of liberal values and everything else. And that's kind of fascinating too. We know how differences in electoral systems drive governing, right? But differences in electoral systems may also drive rhetoric, may also drive sort of cultural messaging and so forth, which again is interesting from a political science point of view.
It's fascinating. Two things is that one is when I came back from living for many years in Europe, I always end up sitting next to the person at the dinner party who said, I really wish we were. It's always in Manhattan or Brooklyn or something. There's always somebody saying, I really wish we were more like Europe, and they have this kind of idealized view of Europe. Not incidentally the Europe, Serbia is part of Europe, not that part of Europe that had a anti-gay riot yesterday in Belgrade, which a friend of mine was punched in the face during, by the way. I found this out this morning. Not that kind of Europe, but this great Europe where there's all sorts of this whole palette of political parties to choose from. I'm not sure that I am really like that. I mean, because look, you have the Sweden Democrats holding the balance of power in the country now. I mean, there's another extremist party on the left, by the way, the Vänsterpartiet, which is the former Communist Party, whose leader is a self-declared Leninist. I mean, and he's a bit of a wacko, a guy named Lars Ohly. But and then of course in Germany you have this grand coalition between the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats. Which I thought was going to be a disaster, by the way, but the Germans are having this amazing economic growth, so maybe I'm wrong about that. And then when I was in, the one time I visited Israel on a sort of reporting trip, that was this unbelievably kind of complicated structure of the Knesset. It made me long for a two-party system. That said, also, that coming back
there
to...
There are pluses and minuses. We can say there are pluses and minuses.
There are pluses and minuses. And in this country, people are trying, there are so many people right now in the Republican Party trying to drive a more, what they consider a more purist agenda of driving out the rhinos, the Republicans in name only, which I find very, very distasteful. Because I like a lot of the rhinos, to be honest. If I were to be a political... choose a mainstream party, I would say that I would be a rhino of the Republicans. But I find this very kind of dispiriting. But it's also it's an interesting thing about American parties that you have to have these really, really long arguments about policy. Whereas to kind of the battle, you always have this expression, the battle for the soul of the Republican Party, the Democratic Party. Is it going to be Code Pink or Bill Clinton, or is it going to be, Pat Buchanan, or sort of more kind of centrist Republicans? The thing that happens in Europe in these situations is those people get into arguments and then they sort of fork off and start some sort of splinter party, which takes 4% of the vote. So, I mean, which is better? I don't know. I mean, as you said, there are pluses and minuses, but it's not as, these people that I meet who, spend their weekends recycling burlap or something and say that, I really wish we had a Green Party in this country. It's like, well, we do
really have a burlap party.
Yeah, well, that's a breakaway from the Green Party. It's like we do have these parties, but people are fairly sensible, and I mean that in the sense that they go to the polls and are under the impression that if they vote for, the Greens or something, they might do it in a local election. I mean, Americans are more targeted that way in voting. They'll vote for the Green Party guy in a local election. But there's certainly, I mean, especially after the experience of 2000. I mean, that just kind of killed third parties for the left anyway.
Right. Well, and I think you occasionally also have the misperception in American politics, and it's sort of on the left you have the misperception that the two-party system is this construction of corporate politics, that has put this system in place, and on the right, well, it's elitists, whoever they may be, when in fact it's basically just the structure of the first past post system that creates the incentives for the two-party system and so forth. So,
I mean, how many of your students or people that you talk to say this to you? The two parties are, I mean, why even bother voting? I have a big spiel against voting myself, but people usually say, why even bother voting? The two parties are exactly the same. Which, by the way, simply isn't true. They do, like, for instance, Obama's going to have a Bush-like extension of, war powers, of Guantanamo, of detention, of targeted killings, and of Afghanistan and Iraq in a lot of ways. But that, look, there's a lot of reasons for that. You can argue against it or for it, but to say that the parties are exactly the same thing, is baffling to me, because the fact that they're so different is what sustains left-wing blogs and sustains right-wing blogs. They are very different. Right. If they were the same thing, we'd all blur together as some sort of pitchfork-carrying angry electorate. And I do think that there are major differences between the two.
Which is sort of the Tom Friedman view of the world, right? The calling for consensus and let's build a supermajority around something that I find important and so forth.
Yeah. God, I really can't stand Tom Friedman. You just reminded me how much I really dislike Tom Friedman.
We should have another blogging head sometime about how much we dislike Tom Friedman, because I actually think that could probably go for 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah, because I wanted to like him because he started out, I don't know if he's listening more, I just stopped paying attention, but he used to be like a good free trade guy, a pro-free trade one of these, good free trade liberals that I enjoyed, and like a populist, or not populist, popular version of like Jagdish Bhagwati, Martin Wolf, and then he just became, and and every friggin' column he writes songs about China, so.
Right.
Anyway.
Well, I am to understand that a guy named Tom Friedman once wrote a book called From Beirut to Jerusalem, which was actually readable, but I believe that guy died, and then somebody else took over his name and CV.
Look, this I thought was one of the great myths of political journalism when everyone was always telling me Beirut to Jerusalem, so it's such a great book, you have to read it.
It seems impossible, but then you read it, and it's actually
But it actually is good. I found a copy of it, goodness, a couple of years ago. I think it was before I went to Israel, and I was trying to get as many different perspectives from, and that was written in late 80s, early 90s.
I think 85 or 86. Yeah.
And it was, and I read it. I thought it was really good. I was like, wow. It was before he became that character, that Tom Friedman character, which, by the way, nobody seems to like. I don't know who's buying this stuff.
No. Well, let's schedule in the future an anti-Tom Friedman blogging ads, because I think that would be a lot of fun. So
let's do it. I'm pumping my fist right now. Let's do it.
So it's been good talking to you, and
it's
we'd
been
like
great
to thank all of our
interesting conversation.
Yeah, and we'd like to thank all of our listeners for staying with us, and we will see you the next time.
Thank you, listeners.
Thank you. Oh, and not just listeners, watchers. Watchers.
Watchers. Thank you, watchers. Bye.